They were the perfect pop act of 1989 and 1990. Two handsome faces, synchronized choreography, and a string of irresistible dance hits. Their debut album sold millions. They won a Grammy. They were everywhere, on magazine covers, on talk shows, and in sold-out arenas. Then, during a live MTV performance in 1990, a backing tape skipped. For the first time, millions of viewers heard it. The song continued, the recorded vocal kept going, and the two men on stage mouthed along, frozen for a heartbeat that shredded their image. What followed was not just a career implosion. It was a seismic legal and cultural reckoning. This is the story of Milli Vanilli, the manufactured pop phenomenon that exposed how much of pop music had been carefully engineered and how audiences and the law would respond. At the center of the story was Frank Farian, a German record producer with a talent for turning studio projects into global phenomena. Farian had already enjoyed success assembling acts where the sound inside the studio and the faces in the spotlight did not always match. When he conceived Milli Vanilli, his aim was simple, and by the metrics of the late 1980s music industry, pragmatic. Create a visually perfect pop duo for the MTV era. He hired first-rate session singers, voices that could carry hooks and harmonies with precision, and paired them with two attractive marketable models, Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan. On records, the session vocalists performed every note. In videos and on stage, Pilatus and Morvan were the public identity of Milli Vanilli. This arrangement worked brilliantly at first. The single hits, songs like Girl You Know It's True and Blame It on the Rain, dominated radio and MTV. The manufactured nature of the project remained behind the curtain. Even critics and industry insiders who suspected studio trickery assumed lip-syncing was an accepted part of live glamour. But the façade was brittle. When a live MTV performance in 1990 exposed the mismatch between recorded voice and live mouths, the fragile construction began to collapse. Once the tape skipped, allegations multiplied. Journalists peeled back the story, discovering the session singers who had actually recorded the album: Charles Shaw, Brad Howell, John Davis, and others. Initially, Farian attempted damage control, claiming the singers had been credited and that Pilatus and Morvan had contributed. But as evidence mounted, he confessed that the duo had not sung on the record. The consequences were swift and unprecedented. The Grammy Award for Best New Artist was rescinded, the first time in the award's history, and millions of records were returned for refunds. The scandal ignited a furious public debate about authenticity and deception in entertainment. The legal fallout was complex and influential. Consumers who bought the album had been sold an image and a name tied to vocals they did not receive. Class action lawsuits followed, arguing that record labels and the producers had engaged in consumer fraud by misrepresenting the product. Contracts were scrutinized. The industry had to reckon with the idea that image alone could no longer be sold without accounting for the actual creative labor behind music. Record companies instituted more transparent crediting practices, and live performance contracts increasingly included clauses about who actually performed vocals on recordings and tours. Beyond immediate legal changes, the Milli Vanilli scandal reshaped cultural expectations. The public grew more skeptical of polished images and more curious about who actually crafted the sounds they loved. The industry adapted to a media environment that demanded authenticity, or, at least, clear disclosure. Artists and producers learned that manufactured success could be lucrative, but fragile. The story ends on a sobering note. Pilatus and Morvan, having been exposed and vilified, struggled profoundly in the aftermath. The session singers receded into relative anonymity despite their central role. Farian continued producing, but with a different calculus. Milli Vanilli remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that in an era when image and reality collide, audiences will eventually want both, and that when the tape skips, the truth has a way of coming through.